Hey, what's up, everybody? CJ Maurer here with The Gist. And in case anybody hasn't noticed, we're all confined to our homes. And we're left in a situation where even though we can't share a lot of the same public spaces, our desire to connect with people on a business level, on a friend level, and especially just to promote our businesses certainly has not waned. So I've used this as the final kick in the pants to finally start the podcast that I've always wanted to do. And I don't have a name for it yet. And I don't have a very sophisticated strategy. I just know that good things happen when you connect with other smart, like-minded people and produce content that can help people. So that's why I have Jason Jurewicz from Brand Landers here with me today, or not really with me. I mean, we're in the same space-time continuum, but you know, you're in your office, I'm in mine. So I guess with will suffice for now. Jason, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for being with me today.
So I knew you were a musician. I don't know if I've ever noticed your guitar collection before. How many guitars do you have?
Hanging up here, I have 3 guitars and 1 bass. The bass is over here, but I'm not really that good of a guitarist. I don't think I've really gotten any better since I was like 20. All those years of practicing were kind of front loaded, and now I just kind of diddle.
I played guitar for about 6 months when I was 17, and then I brought it with me to college, and it sat in my dorm room, and I almost never played again. I could still play a couple of chords, but my fingers are really slow, and if I'm ever at my brother's house and I'm trying to screw around, the tips of my fingers get like beat up really, really fast. And I remember as like when you were playing guitar, that started to happen at first, but then it's almost like they morphed and they got stronger and they became much more resistant to like the abrasion from the guitar strings. So I certainly
And now your hands are wimps.
Now my hands are wimps, and you know, I'm wearing comfortable clothes all day, trying to work, trying to take care of my kids. I don't know when my next haircut is coming. Do you have a strategy for your hair during this pandemic?
Funny you should mention it, especially since you just talked about your time at college. I'll tell you about mine. Yeah, I'm going to cut my own, and I already have a couple times. So I started cutting hair when I was probably like 16. This was back in the 90s when it was cool to have your hair shaved from here down and the top parted in the middle, which I've watched some music videos by bands, and apparently that's cool for some bands again. But yeah, my mom refused to pay for my haircut if I was going to get that haircut. And my buddy's mom was like, I'm not giving you that haircut if you want that haircut. So we decided we would give each other haircuts when we were like 16. And then as the trends changed and stuff, we kept cutting hair. So that's how I made a lot of my spending money during college was cutting hair. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I think I'm going to cut my own hair as well, except I'm probably just going to buzz it. I think I'm going to give myself a quarantine cut because I don't think I have the skills that you do. And I don't trust to be in the same room as you. Not that I would trust it anyways. But now at least I have an excuse to not be in the same room as you.
Right. Because now my hair could make you dead.
Yeah, right. Exactly. This is wonderful. It's got to be a wonderful time for introverts too, I would think. You know what I mean? People who prefer less time in large groups or being around people for extended periods of time. So,
yeah, I think I hear different things about like what makes someone an introvert or an extrovert. You know, I've heard a lot of it talk about like how you're recharged, if you're recharged being around people or whatever. I do think, I have 2 little kids. You have little kids. So I have an 18-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. And I feel like if I'm recharged by being alone, and if that's my definition for being an introvert, I think for a lot of introverts now might be tough because there's not really any alone time. I'm constantly surrounded by my family, which in a lot of ways is wonderful. And in a lot of ways, if you have little kids, you know, is like super exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. We're certainly not bored here for sure.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head. I used to always think that an introvert was somebody that's shy. It is not the case. Introversion versus extroversion has nothing to do with being shy. It is just that introverts, like their energy gets drained if they spend long amounts of time around people. So they recharge by being alone. Extroverts gain energy by being around other people. I heard somebody say once, it's where's your battery? Introverts, their battery is internal. Extroverts, their battery is external. So,
I like that.
yeah, it always pays to listen to people smarter than you and remember it.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. Aside from the fact that we could shoot the shit for a while about, you know, whatever we do, we wanted to bring you on, or we wanted to connect because Jason is a very experienced and talented creative strategist and director who's also got a lot of experience in video production. And Jason, why don't you tell a little bit more? I want to ask you some questions about how you think this current pandemic is going to impact video production and content creation, and maybe some advice that you might have for people who are trying to create content with limited resources at home. But before we do that, why don't you talk a little bit about you and Brand Landers and what you guys do to give people a frame of reference?
Yeah, so Brand Landers started out, I was doing graphic design and web development, and I'd work with small businesses who really just wanted to tell their story. And right around that time, the technology was changing so that you could get really nice cameras and do some really nice video stuff for not a lot of money compared to what it used to be. So because so much of our emphasis was trying to tell the story of a business, it was just kind of natural that we just started doing more and more video production. Initially, I didn't really know much about the production side of things, so I started working on as many big projects as I could with other local production companies, but also different movies. So I've worked on a bunch of like big budget feature films, you know, like millions and millions of dollars. I've worked on a lot of like indie films to kind of see how you can do things on a budget. And now, you know, we do a lot of our own productions where we're working with small to mid-sized businesses, helping them create content where budget is usually somewhat of a concern. You know, for different businesses, that's a different thing, right? For some places, on a budget is, you know, under $3,000 or $4,000. For other businesses, on a budget is $30,000 or $40,000. So it kind of depends, but we try to figure out how can we tell the story, how can we get the content that somebody needs at the production level that they need to represent their brand well, but also be really mindful that you want to put as much of that production value on screen and into the content rather than just, you know, kind of pissing it away on things that don't matter, that you don't really need.
How do you prioritize? Yeah, it does. How do you prioritize a budget and production value? Like, what elements of making video content are most important to you, and where would you dedicate the most time and resources?
The most time that I think businesses should plan on, you may have heard like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is really going into any video production, but really any endeavor, knowing where you kind of want things to end, right? I think a lot of times it's really easy for folks to say, oh, I need a video. Everybody's doing video right now. Let's make more video content. And while I agree with the sentiment, if you are just starting to crap out content because you just want to crap out content, you're just going to be one of the like 300 hours of YouTube content that's put out every day. Nobody's really going to resonate with what you're putting out there. So I think the biggest thing is really think about what you want that piece of content to do for you as a brand, but also for your audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
I think, yeah, and spending time really, and if you spend time on that, I think you can kind of reverse engineer then the development of the content, because it's really easy in my industry, like, and this goes for myself as well, to get really caught up on getting the lighting perfect and the you know, selecting the right camera and you know, all these technical aspects that people just really don't care about. I mean, I think for certain productions they matter, but you know, you're in your home office right now, I'm in mine. Jimmy Fallon's shooting the Tonight Show from his house. Like, people really care more about content. So I think if you're a business owner trying to get content created, really think about your audience, your brand, and what you want to say, more than getting wrapped up into having this huge production that's going to cost you a ton of money and special effects or, you know, really fancy post-production. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Recently I was actually, a local business reached out to me and asked to meet because they wanted help developing a new website. So I said, okay. So I went there and I had the meeting and I started asking some questions, really just kind of like multitudes of why. Okay, so why is this? Okay, interesting. Why that, right? And what was uncovered and actually became apparent to everybody in the meeting was that while they absolutely may need or want a new website, what they really, really needed is they have a very specific target demographic, very, very specific. And they wanted a better method for developing and maintaining relationships with this demographic that refers them a lot of business. So it's a very defined referral source. So they needed a way to develop and maintain relationships with them, as well as a way to unload some of the responsibilities from the plate of their operations manager, who's also handling all of the marketing. So it's kind of a similar situation. Like a website could be a part of it, but what they really need is a much bigger picture. And I think when you can identify that and put your finger on that, you can be a lot more effective in the diagnosis and then the prescription of the solution. And it sounds like you're kind of advocating for a similar thing with video, right? Begin with the end in mind. Don't make a video because you want a video, right? First figure out like, okay, we want people to take this certain action, or we want to reduce friction in this part of our customer service process, or whatever it is. I actually had a similar thought years ago when I got my first tattoo. When I got my first tattoo, I waited to get it right away because I didn't want to get a tattoo for the sake of getting the tattoo. I waited long enough until I believed that I wanted to symbolize what the tattoo would symbolize, and then get the, I mean, that's a stupid story from when I was 19, but you get the point.
Yeah. And that's even in my process dealing with clients has really changed, because a lot of times the conversation does start with, hey, we really loved your work with this client. Can you make us a video? And for a long time, I did things really backwards, and we'd start trying to make that video that they wanted. And in the process of trying to make that video, we started trying to figure out what we were actually trying to solve for the business. And it was kind of a lot of wasted time doing things backwards. So now, I still get those calls, and if that's really what a client wants to do, I'm not going to strong arm them into doing something they don't, but I strongly recommend saying, let's start with strategy and how this video is going to fit into the bigger picture of all of your marketing. And even if it's internal marketing or external marketing, doesn't really matter. I think having a game plan going into it is a way stronger way of approaching things, rather than just trying to guess your way through a project into what it might do for you.
How is this current situation impacting not just video production, right? Because I'm aware that, video production companies are not considered essential, and therefore they're not allowed to, go to somebody else's business or have people come to their studio. So we can gather that somebody in your situation, businesses in your situation, do not have it easy right now. So beyond just how it might impact your industry, what are your thoughts about how this current pandemic and the work from home mandates are impacting content creation in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of touched on a little bit ago that, production quality, I don't think matters as much now as it used to. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't matter as much. It's just easier to get a high production value from a lot less expensive gear and a lot fewer crew members than you would have needed a long time ago. So, and I've had conversations with folks in my industry about that for a long time. Now you have little one-handed gimbals that you can buy for your cell phone and get shots that used to cost, thousands of dollars, because you had to rent a dolly and you had to have an operator on the dolly and somebody to push the dolly and lay the tracks of the dolly and do all these things that now you can do this with, and you get the shot you want, So already there's been kind of that shift in technology, and, a lot of young people have already been adapting to that and adopting it. Some of the biggest stars right now aren't movie stars, they're TikTok stars and YouTube stars who are shooting things on cell phones and webcams and making things look really good. And I think what this kind of quarantine is really doing is it's making older folks my age and up, start seeing what that content looks like and kind of recalibrating their brains to what production ought to look like. Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel are shooting their stuff just like this. If you search the web, and go on and look for The Tonight Show, the way that you look right now is almost identical to what, Jimmy Fallon's looking like. And this is a huge
I'll take
national.
that as a compliment.
Yeah, you are a good-looking man, CJ. And yeah, so I think it's kind of been this kind of leveling of the playing field in a lot of ways for a lot of business owners and a lot of entertainers, a lot of people who have something to say. Whether that leveling of the playing field is good or bad or not for my industry, I don't really know, but I think it's definitely going to allow a lot of people to put out content and not feel like they need to have the $50,000 budget to make things look amazing, because people are getting used to watching someone on a cell phone or a webcam say what they need to say. And if what they have to say is worth hearing, I think we're okay with listening, even if it doesn't look and sound the best, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, even some of us who are in the older generation, like I'm not, I'm not in the TikTok or Snapchat
Right.
generation. A lot of people would consider me in the social media generation because
Yeah.
there's Facebook and Twitter, and if you want to lump LinkedIn with that, although I think that's kind of in a category of its own. I bet you if we all racked our brains, we can all probably think of a bunch of people that we follow that we've never met in real life. We don't really have, a legitimate reason for following them other than the fact that we like them and we find whatever they talk about or share interesting. And the vast majority of the content that they're pushing out is, they're either, thumbing it out at the breakfast table or on the couch while watching Netflix or recording
Yeah.
something on a cell phone or with a webcam. And nobody thinks like, man, hey, you should go follow this person. I mean, they put out really good, the production quality isn't that great, but like the stuff that they talk about is awesome or interesting or hilarious,
Yeah.
right? It's like, it's absolutely an afterthought. So I think that's really, and I think your point, so if I'm understanding your point correctly, it's that as a society, in terms of how we consume media, there's already been a shift away from higher production value for more content, right? And
Yeah.
that and it's been maybe being spurred mostly by the younger generation, and perhaps this current situation when we're all stuck at home and left to our own personal technologies just might like accelerate that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I could be really wrong. I'm just a guy. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just guessing. But yeah, I like it a lot of times, and I've been saying this analogy for a while, but the printing press, right? When the printing press first came out, there were folks who had dedicated their lives to having the perfect calligraphy and using only the finest, lambskin pages for their books. And they would spend, a whole year creating one perfect book that they would then sell, and that was their life. That was their livelihood, is transcribing manuscripts. And people cared about the paper quality and the calligraphy and all of that stuff. If I went and bought a book now for $10,000 and I was like, yeah, man, it was totally worth it. I mean, look at this penmanship. People would think I was crazy. Not that we don't care how our books look, not that we don't care about the printed word anymore, but the emphasis on like having everything perfect has kind of been changed a little bit. We have types that we use now instead of writing everything by hand. And I think a lot of that stuff is happening already. More and more, video creators are using kind of post-production packs where you can put like a lower third for somebody's name and it flashes up, and you don't have to have someone know the ins and outs of After Effects or Fusion in order to make that happen. They can just buy a template and it'll do it for them. And a lot of these things are already included on apps for their phone that they can buy for, $10, $20. And now stuff that used to cost a ton of money and a ton of time are just kind of templatized and able to be inserted where they need it to be. So the emphasis isn't on trying to figure out how to creatively create this stuff in terms of the stuff being all of the, fancy, production things. The creativity and the time can be put into thinking how to say and do the interesting thing that is going to resonate with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I know you said like, oh, I'm just a guy, but I think that's true. It sounds very plausible that that's what's happening, and you have a lot of good examples as to why. I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, I think the shift is just happening too, just when you think about kind of how much media is out there for us to consume, right? Like our parents' generation, when I was a kid, right? I grew up with channels 2, 4, and 7, right? And then sometimes if I got the antenna just right, we could get like Fox 29 or PBS. So it made a lot of sense for a business to kind of create this perfect piece of flagship content that was going to go out to everyone watching TV, right? I read this, or I watched this thing that Danny DeVito was talking about when he had been doing acting and then finally was on Taxi. And he's like, overnight, when he showed up on the show Taxi, he went from a guy to a superstar. Because if you were on a TV show in the 80s, there was like how many options? Everyone was watching this. And if everyone was watching the programming, that means everybody was also watching the advertising messages that were associated with that programming. Yeah. So everyone was watching it. Now, you know, there's so many shows on TV. I mean, cable, I can't even wrap my head around how many programs there must be where people are trying to buy and sell advertising during those programs, right? And then you start adding in things like Netflix and Amazon and YouTube, and it's just like this whole craziness of the amount of content that's out there to be consumed, and then the advertising that's going to be placed within it, and then content that is advertising, and all, you know, kind of, it's all kind of this big pool now that's been swirled around of what people are watching. And so to really stand out and invest tons of time and money into one piece of content, to me, doesn't make as much sense. And I'm seeing that with my clients already. You know, clients that used to spend a lot of money to create one perfect piece are now taking that budget, coming in with kind of a longer term strategy and saying, well, how can we create lots of content? And how can we take that content and make cut downs or smaller edits of that content to live on social and the different platforms that exist within social?
Yeah, like repurposing.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, Seth Godin really, I feel like, was a foot soldier for leading this movement, or at least like raising awareness for this significant cultural and economic shift that's happening. He described it as the age of mass customization or mass segmentation or something like that. But what he talked about is, I remember reading one of his books a while ago, probably 8-ish years ago, talked about the bell curve, right? And, you know, with what, you know, we grew up with when we were really young, and our parents and certainly generations before that, is, you know, 80% of society lived in the middle, right? Lived with like the mass produced commodities. There were only a couple of television channels, right? There were only a couple of brands in almost any category. But what the internet has done is it's broken down the barriers to entry, right? You know, we've seen this be paired with, you know, like cost to produce things shrink. And so whether it be the means to produce goods and or the ability to connect on a peer-to-peer level, it has really enabled this age of mass customization. And what he advocated for is this traditional bell curve where 80% of the people are in the middle, and then you have 10% on each end as the outliers. That curve is just flattening. And what you're having now is, and that was actually the name of the book, now that I remember it, We Are All Weird, right? Where the idea is, like, if you are into Halloween-themed polka music, 20 years ago, you would never be able to go to a record store, remember those, record store, and find that on the shelf, because so few people would buy it. It wouldn't be profitable for the business to stock it. But now anyone can record it, put it on iTunes, and build an audience around it. And that same thing applies for everyone else. So like, as much as, like, if you want to consider the downside is that the channels for publishing and promoting content don't have as wider audiences, right? Because everyone is now hyper segmented. There's not just people who can consume their news through one newspaper or one or two television stations. There's all these social media, there's a million websites, there's everything, right? So the other side to that is, though, that, like, now everybody, right, has the means of production. Everybody can be their own media company. And that's one of the things that I've always suggested businesses adopt in terms of a mindset is, from now on, you are your business, and you are a media company, because the resources to do that are significantly more available, and the costs have significantly lowered. And the impact in terms of the business is great, right? Content can be used in a variety of ways. Content can be used to put out there and let people know that you exist. You know, if you're a business, like a B2B business that has like a sales team, or not even B2B, you have a sales team, that content can be given to the sales team and say, hey, when you go meeting with people, show this to them, send this email to them, whatever. You can also, like, build a little tribe of like email subscribers or customers and add more value and like do more of the things and share more of the content around why somebody works with you in the first place. So like the ability to repurpose it is absolutely, I mean, just this, I know I'm rambling now, but that's, you know me, that's what I do. Just this thing that we're recording right now, right? This is a long video. I don't know how long it's going to be. We didn't script this, but it's a really long video. And once I stop recording and get this MP4 file, right, I could publish this on YouTube. I can embed it on my website. I can pull out the audio and, you know, push it out to iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or Google Podcasts or whatever. I can transcribe this conversation, turn it into a blog post for more SEO. I can cut little clips of this and sprinkle this across social media. I can email it to maybe anybody who's ever talked to me about video, right? If I have that tracked in my CRM, which I don't. But I mean, it's just the malleability of content, especially video content, is extraordinary. And I think it's also coming at a time where you know, people are, quite frankly, their schedules are a little bit more freed up. Most people in most instances. And they're trying to reach people whose schedules are a little bit more freed up, who are spending more time in front of screens, right?
Yeah.
And I just think there's a wonderful opportunity for people to assert themselves, to be a voice, to add value, and establish themselves as a thought leader in an otherwise like kind of a silent time, in the sense where you know, the normal channels for exposing or promoting your business to prospects in the community at large are temporarily shut off, right? And otherwise the news is dominated by COVID-19 and things related to that. So like, I think there's a significant space for people and businesses to kind of be a leader and be like, hey, like, you know, and kind of do what we're doing, not to pat ourselves on the back. Certainly, like we're no pros at this. You know, I'm sure we're gonna watch this and be like, oh man, we got to fix this lighting, we got to fix this audio. But the idea of just starting and iterating and improving and not feeling like every piece of content needs to be the most perfect thing. If you can just show up and add value, like that in and of itself, each one time is enough.
Yeah, and just to build on that, so I'm going to destroy this story, and it's probably taking all the truth out of it, but I'm doing my best to tell it accurately. But yeah, so apparently this is a real study. People watching this, look it up because I'm getting it all wrong. But there was a class, a ceramics class, where students were divided into two different groups. Each group was given an amount of clay, let's say 100 pounds of clay. Again, I'm making this up because I don't remember the specifics. So each group was given 100 pounds of clay. The one group was told they had all semester to create the perfect piece, whatever that was that they wanted to hand in. They could create as many pieces as they wanted to, but they had to hand in just one piece of clay. And that perfect piece was going to be what was judged for their grade. The other group was given, again, this 100 pounds of clay and just told, your grade is based on how much clay you use. So if you use 80 pounds of clay, you get an 80. If you use 60 pounds of clay, you get a 60. If you use 100 pounds of clay, you get 100. So as much clay as you can use to create as much content, you know, pieces of ceramic as you want to create, go for it. And what they found is at the end of it, the group that improved the most wasn't the group that was even trying to create anything perfect. It was just from constantly reiterating what they had just created and trying things and experimenting, they found something that worked for them and they developed a style and they had a lot of fun doing it. And I think it's easy. I'm like a huge perfectionist. I always want things to be perfect. You know, before we set this interview up, I was like carrying the phone around trying to figure out where I was going to set it. You know, I want things to be great, but I think you got to remind yourself that you're not going to do something great the first time you do it, right? Like you have a little girl, right? As she's learning how to do things, it's like the first time she tries to ride her bike, if she falls, as a dad, you're not going to be like, well, you're done, kid. If you can't ride your bike the first time, why try again, right? Instead, the message is always, well, get up, try again, let's do it. And we tell kids that all the time. You know, I have a little girl who's 18 months old, just learning to, you know, when she was just learning to walk, she fell constantly, but she kept getting up over and over and over and over again. And somewhere as we grow up, we tell ourselves that we don't need to be that resilient and that we don't need to keep getting up again and keep trying new things. And we tell ourselves that if we can't do something right the first time, something about us is just innately broken and there's no way we're ever going to learn. And I think whether it's creating content or it's learning to ride a bike or it's, making ceramic pots, really the way that you get better is by just doing it, being okay with failing and getting up and going again. And
Yeah.
I know every time I talk to business owners, the biggest reason they give when they're not creating content is they don't know what they're going to say and they're afraid it's not going to be good and nobody's going to watch it and it's going to suck. And those are all the things that everybody feels, whether you're a professional in the industry or you're a lay person who just is doing this as part of, creating content. It can be nerve wracking because you don't want to fail in it. But I think just being okay with saying, well, this might suck, right? Like what we're doing today, CJ, it might suck. And we might watch it back and think, wow, Jason and CJ ramble a lot. They need to get to the point. This is useless. Or we might say it's pretty good. Or like you said, we might say, well, this is how we can make it better. But just the act of doing, the act of producing will lead ultimately to improvement. An improvement that can only take place through practice and trial and error.
There's nothing that you're good at or great at that you didn't once suck at. Yes, I totally agree. I think about that.
I talk all the time now. I just ramble and talk and talk and talk. When I was a kid, they sent me to special ed classes because they thought there was something wrong with me because I was like 6 years old and no one could understand me because I couldn't speak. So even the most fundamental things, talking, walking, sleeping, speaking, these are all things that at some point we sucked at, right? Again, like our kids, when you're a baby, you have to like have somebody help you fall asleep, because you're like, I don't know how to calm my own brain down. I'm a baby. And yeah, like you said, you get better through trying. And then it's a scary thing to become, but just being okay with failing is a huge indicator of success,
Yeah, I love the analogy with the kids. My daughter, her name's Riley, and she's just learning her letters and writing and stuff, and she can write her name. And we were practicing our last name, and so I was spelling it out, and there's 2 lowercase r's in our last name, and she's so used to writing the uppercase r's, she was trying to do a lowercase r. So she was kind of thrown off. She didn't do it as well as I first wrote it, and she got all frustrated. And I kind of felt all of those same things where in some instances she's just so resilient and isn't flooded with self-doubt when she fails at something. But even as early as 4, that already starts to creep in. And, I was actually just thinking something very similar about that just the other day. Cause you totally get, and that's honestly I especially when I was a kid, I'm not the most patient person, and I get frustrated easily with tasks to myself, right? I get frustrated. I don't usually get frustrated with people, but I get frustrated when I'm trying to fix something and I'm just not that, you know what I mean? It's not going the way, something like that. So she definitely, unfortunately, gets that from me. But so here's the point, right? So if we can accept the premise that the creative strategy, the messaging, the end goal of content, all content, not just video content, is not as important as the production quality or sophistication. And that's probably being accelerated by recent times. And that the only way to get better at it is to do it and refine and iterate. That leaves somebody squarely in the position of, well, so start doing it. And one of the reasons why we decided to set this up is because, we were talking, we work together and we're also friends. So we were talking on the phone as people do. And you were talking about some of the things that you have planned, or some ideas that you have planned for sharing resources with people who want to start bootstrapping, content production on their own for people or for businesses. Without giving that away, do you want to start talking about, maybe share some ideas or just maybe just some basic advice that you might want to give somebody who might be watching this? God bless them that they're still watching this, and maybe is interested in starting to do what we're doing. By the way, full disclosure, I have this is my iPhone on a tripod that, remember when you recommended me to buy it on Amazon? I bought it.
I did.
I haven't used
Have
it
you
yet.
used it?
No, I haven't used it yet, but I'm going to. That's the point, right? I'm going to
Right.
just like I'm gonna use that food processor we got as a wedding gift 5 years ago that's collecting dust. Like I'm totally going to use it at some point. No, this I
Right.
really will. But what do you think? Like, what if aside from maybe they should get a tripod for their iPhone? General advice. What would you suggest to people who want to start making content, specifically video content?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of things that I should probably have prepared to say, and I don't. I think the biggest one is first just do it, right? See what you're making and what looks good or bad. What platform you're going to put it on, right? Like is another big thing. Think with the end goal in mind. If you're going to be putting something onto a platform like Facebook, for example, holding your phone sideways, that's what I would do if I wanted something to look cinematic, right? Maybe I'm making a promo video for a business. I want it to look like a movie. I'd hold my phone sideways. But if you're trying to put something on YouTube or I should say on Facebook, and you want as much real estate as possible while someone's scrolling through their news feed, well then hold your phone vertically, which I know sounds crazy because everybody's like, don't hold your phone vertically. And normally I would recommend it. But if you know that's the platform you're going on, you're going to be creating an Instagram story, hold it vertically so you can be creating content for the platform, right? So think about where it's going to end up. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, where's it going to go? And kind of adjust your orientation of your phone accordingly. The next thing I'd say is don't get hung up on having gear. I intentionally, even though I have literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment over here, I'm using my cell phone. And I know you bought a tripod for your cell phone. I did, and I have no idea where it is. But like right now, I took a stool, and behind my phone, I have a slipper holding my phone up, and I use duct tape to hold it there. So I'm not using anything fancy. There's a fluorescent overhead light over my head. I don't have any fancy production gear that I'm using for this conversation, kind of to prove a point to myself that like, well, if I'm telling people just to do it, like maybe I should just do it too. I guess those would be like.
That's really interesting, by the way. That was interesting. I always found it was interesting for me to learn about you, your how quickly you are to embrace bootstrapped content production, really, because the first time we got to know each other was around a project that I was leading at my former employer, and obviously we hired you to produce this really awesome promotional video that has performed and still performs really, really well. And on the set, right, we had audio, we had at least a sound guy, you were directing, you had a camera operator, a production assistant, and I think even there was a makeup artist there too, right? There was like,
yeah, we had hair, makeup, we had art director, we had multiple PAs. I mean, one of the shots, to keep it quiet, because if you remember, we actually had like 4 people pushing the big like wagon because the tractor was too loud. So it was a big production, lots of folks running around.
So I just always found it interesting that like you are so used to living in this world and doing this for small, medium-sized businesses, also having worked on very high budget movie sets, but yet at the same time, I've always respected how you're in tune with the practicality that a lot of small businesses have and prioritize the value of the message and the value of the content over all things, because I think that's like super important.
Yeah, well, I think part of that for me is that I didn't get into this as a filmmaker. A lot of the directors and cinematographers that I know, super talented people, I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but they got into this business as filmmakers, right? So part of like the film experience is creating a world that just encapsulates the viewer so that they totally feel a part of this realm, right? Like if you're watching Joker, you want to feel like you're living in that period and you're part of that world. If you're watching Lord of the Rings, same thing. But if you're listening to Joe Rogan talk, it doesn't really matter where he's talking. You just want to hear what he has to say. And I came more from a marketing background with a little bit of punk rock thrown in, like we were talking about the guitars. Like I started in bands when I was like 15 and 16, so I kind of have this thing already in me where I like this like down and dirty guerrilla marketing, like handing out show flyers on the side of a corner and hawking CDs out of your trunk. Like I already came from that. So I think when I talk to business owners, I like to think like, okay, this is our budget. Yeah, we could do things where we get a crew of 20 people and do all this craziness, but I think we could do something just as cool, if not cooler, if we think about what resources we have available to us and we think about how to tell the story, leaning into what our end goal is rather than trying to say, well, how do we make this look as perfect as possible? Not that I don't want things to look good. I do. It's just, if people are watching this on their cell phone while they're taking a dump or laying in bed right before they go to sleep, their biggest concern isn't going to be whether or not the person speaking has the perfect rim light behind them, or if the key light is positioned just right so they get that beautiful Rembrandt lighting on the opposing cheek. Like, they're not going to be paying attention. They're not going to care. It's not the thing they're worried about. What they're interested in is, does this make me feel something? Does this inspire me to change something about me? Is this something I want to share with somebody? And that stuff doesn't really come from whether or not you're using, a $100,000 camera and $60,000 lenses, or if you're using a cell phone.
Yeah, I bet if you audited the most shared content across social media over the last however many years, I bet you most of it is not highly produced, just because the likelihood of any content being, shot on a cell phone or thumbed out on a personal laptop or whatever it is, it just being,
Yeah.
there's so much more of that created, right? So
Well, I also think there's a level of authenticity that comes
yeah.
from something that's not like a high level of production quality. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine he's a director of photography, a DP, and we were talking about this. I'm in like a bunch of Facebook groups, probably like everybody is, that are kind of related to their industry. And I used to do a lot of weddings. And this wedding photographer a while ago, and I was sharing this story with Chris, the DP, was upset because she had posed this group, and after they were done posing, they all, like, the bride and her bridal party, like, were all holding hands and praying. And so she took like a really beautiful professional photo of this. Somebody who was there and was part of the party but not in the photo snapped something with their cell phone and posted it to social media, and the image that was done on the cell phone like blew up, right? And so this photographer was really upset because she had staged this and had this really perfect photo taken, and that never really saw the light of day. The photo that went viral, of this bride holding hands and praying with her bridesmaids, is what blew up the internet. And I can't say this is 100% true. I'm just, again, speculating, but I feel like what made that content blow up is that it wasn't this professional piece of photography, but that it looked like it was taken on somebody's phone. It's like that voyeuristic. It's looking into somebody's life and saying like, hey, that person's just like me. I'm just like them. They're, Seth Godin, they're part of my tribe. And so I think sometimes production quality, sometimes I get nervous. I'm like, I hope nobody in my industry like hears me and like, well, he's out of like the network of directors and cinematographers in this world, because I'm talking against production value.
It's funny because the two of us are in the marketing industry, and we get paid to help tell businesses stories in a variety of different ways, and big believers in making stuff look good. I invest in production quality for my clients and my own business. So it is kind of funny that we're talking about this, but what we're trying to do is offer a different perspective to people, to encourage them to start making content, especially right now where the access to the higher production value isn't as good. And I think using examples of situations where candid content creation or low production quality, wherever you want to call it, is advantageous, I think is nothing but not just legitimate proof, but if anything, motivation to, inspire people to maybe do some of this on your own. So like, we're obviously, we work together, spending more time on money on higher production value, and it works, and it adds credibility, and, it's got the wow factor, and it absolutely has its place, and I think always will.
Yes.
Now what we're doing is we're basically advocating for this other method of content production to have a seat at the table, and for it not to necessarily just be, amateur. that it could also be strategic and valuable.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Jimmy Fallon is making the Tonight Show from his house, right? There was a time when that was just not possible, and now it is. And I do think, you know, to your point, like, yes, I think production quality is super important. And when even though I didn't use any professional equipment in my home, I'm like, oh, well, I'll put some different colored lights back here, and I'll have like daylight coming in, so that's a little bit more interesting. And so I'm still thinking of things to make things look good. But yeah, there's just such an emphasis sometimes within the world of marketing and advertising on spending a lot of money in order to get things perfect. And that just, in a sense, goes against my sensibilities, from the punk rock mentality that I have all the way to the idea that like doing your reps and creating is how you improve, to the segmentations of audiences and tribes just kind of being, you know, so small now that to create something for everybody doesn't make sense. Create something for somebody. And if you're trying to spend $100,000 doing that a million different times, that's exhausting, and you're going to go broke. And so, like, yeah, I'm not against things looking awesome and spending time on projects and thinking about what you're doing. I just don't think that that should be an excuse for why you can't do something, because that excuse I just don't think is relevant anymore for most businesses. I mean, not all businesses. You know, it probably makes sense for some really big brands to still invest in national campaigns with high production value and not have somebody to shoot with their cell phone. But for the everyday business, you know, I don't think all their content needs to be perfect. It just doesn't make sense. You know, you don't need to have that perfectly bound book with the perfect calligraphy and lambskin in order to learn something from Seth Godin. You can download a PDF or listen to an Audible, you know?
That's a technique called closing the loop. That was very well done. I like the reference back to the manuscript. It was really
Thanks.
well done. Hey, I'm running up against it because I got to jump on another call. But I thought this was super fun.
Yeah.
Did you?
I did.
Good.
I liked it.
It wasn't just me. I'm glad.
No, I like talking to you, and I like you, and I like talking, and I like saying things I think. So the combination is the perfect storm for a guy like me.
What a cocktail.
I know, right?
Hey, so I'm going to be doing this some more. I'm actually, I have another friend named, and somebody I work with named Allie, and we also get along. We also have a lot in common, and we're actually planning on do something like this again. And maybe, who knows, maybe one day I'll have a name for this and a logo, and, you know, maybe I'll get a better microphone and, you know, a more nuanced production strategy. But for the meantime, I'm just starting to make the content, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. So I thank you for being my collaborator in crime on this maiden voyage, if you will. Before we break, if anybody's interested in getting in touch with you, how would they do that?
Great question. I am on the World Wide Web at www.brandlanders.com. You can email me at jason@brandlanders.com, or hey, I'll put my phone number out there. You can call me on my cell phone, 716-982-9974. I've had people get freaked out. They're like, really, aren't you afraid people are going to call you on your phone? I'm like, no, if people are calling me to give me business, I am not freaked out by that. That would make me happy. So yeah, that's the information that I have, man.
Well, Jason, thanks so much. I have no doubt that we'll do it again. Appreciate your time, and talk soon.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.